She lived in a small town where everyone knew each other by name, and news spread faster than the morning breeze. The streets were narrow, paved with old cobblestones, and the houses had peeling paint on their shutters and flower pots on the windowsills. Every morning she would step out of her little house with its wooden stairway, inhaling the fresh scent of morning bread wafting from the bakery around the corner. A light mist drifted along the street, and the cool air rang with the chime of the bell at the door of the nearby cafe. She walked along the street she knew down to the tiniest cracks in the tiles, greeting passers-by with a nod and a smile. Her path led to the bookstore, which had become a second home for her. Inside, it always smelled of old pages, freshly brewed coffee, and something else. That warm, homely comfort that words could hardly capture. Wooden shelves were lined with books of all kinds, from time-worn novels with yellowed pages to brand-new editions with glossy covers. On the windowsill, among stacks of magazines, lay an old fluffy cat who lazily opened one eye whenever the doorbell rang. Time passed more slowly here, and every day began the same way. Yet that only made it feel warmer. On a rainy day, the town was wrapped in quiet, almost melancholic weather. Raindrops ran down the windows, leaving long, transparent trails. And somewhere beyond the horizon, distant thunder rumbled lazily. She sat behind the counter, flipping through a stack of brand-new books, when the doorbell suddenly rang, letting in not only a guest, but also a gust of cold air and the scent of wet asphalt. He entered, shaking off the drops from his dark blue jacket, and ran a hand through his hair to brush away the clinging strands. Tall, with that attentive gaze that seemed to notice every detail around him. And a tired but genuinely warm smile. His boots creaked softly on the wooden floor, and the last stubborn drop of rain fell from his shoulder to the ground. "Good afternoon," he said in a deep, slightly husky voice, and after a brief pause added, "By any chance, do you have the Garden of Forgotten Dreams?" She looked up, and in that moment, it seemed as if the bookstore had grown brighter, as though the ceiling lamps had turned on a little more. The book he asked for was one she knew almost by heart. She had read it many times and loved every line. "Of course," she replied softly. "It's one of my favorites." As she walked toward the farthest shelf, he didn't rush to follow, but his eyes traced every movement, as if he wanted to unravel her story before she even began to speak. Outside, the raindrops slid down more slowly, and within the quiet of the bookstore, the only sounds were the gentle tap of their footsteps on the floor and the steady breathing of two people who did not yet know that this day would change their lives. She handed him the book, and for a brief moment, their fingers touched. That touch was warmer than the entire store, warmer than a mug of hot coffee in hand. He smiled just a little more noticeably, and she, as if afraid that her smile might reveal everything she felt. From that day on, he began appearing more and more often. At first, with an excuse. Sometimes for a new book, sometimes supposedly for a rare edition that, as he knew, wouldn't arrive for another month. Occasionally, he picked up volumes without even opening the bookmarks. And then she realized it wasn't really about the books at all. He entered quietly, but each time with the same tired, slightly ironic smile. They laughed, debated about characters and plots, as if both knew that the argument was merely an excuse to talk a little longer. He liked to argue that certain authors were overrated, while she, laughing, defended them like old friends. Sometimes they would sit at a small round table by the window. There was always a little vase with wildflowers, which she changed every morning. Outside, the rain ran down the glass in thin silver threads, and the droplets fell in a rhythm where words seemed unnecessary. In those moments, they simply drank tea. Her cup always filled with jasmine. His, strong black tea with a slice of lemon. Occasionally, he brought warm pastries from the nearby bakery. Occasionally, small postcards with quotes written in his neat handwriting. And one day, on an especially gloomy day, he arrived with a bouquet of yellow tulips, saying it was to bring sunshine into the bookstore, even if it's absent outside. Time spent with him flowed differently, softly, unhurriedly, like the pages of a beloved novel you don't want to turn too quickly. And she found herself more and more often realizing that she awaited the chime of the doorbell just a little more eagerly than the smell of morning coffee. One evening they were left alone in the bookstore as the town emptied and the streets were wrapped in a soft silence. Everything was calm. Only the muted glow of streetlights filtered through the windows, gently illuminating the shelves of books. They sat at their usual table by the window, side by side, silently watching the slowly changing cityscape. Her cup of jasmine tea trembled slightly in her hands when he, without taking his eyes off her face, quietly said, "You know, I've long wanted to just stay here with you. Without books, without conversation, just to be near you." She looked away, her heart beating faster. But no words came. Instead, he carefully brought his hand to hers, and the warmth of his palm unexpectedly spread through her entire body. "You always know what to say to make the world around feel better," she murmured almost in a whisper. And in her voice there was something new, a tenderness she had never dared to admit to herself before. They smiled at each other in silence, and an invisible bond appeared between them, one that could not be explained in words. Every glance, every slight gesture seemed full of meaning. That evening in the bookstore became the beginning of their new story. Quiet, touching, and filled with warmth. Like the first lines of a novel they would write together. 6 months had passed, and the feelings Anita had tried to keep under control had grown too strong to ignore. Every time Max entered the bookstore, her heart raced, and her thoughts tangled. He had become more than a friend, more than someone to laugh and argue about books with. He had become a part of her life, a part of her heart. But fear would not let go. "No, I can't," she whispered to herself. "He's young, full of life, and I'm a widow. I have a child. If he finds out, he won't want to continue this." Every time Max looked at her with a gentle smile or tender attention, Anita felt both happiness and pain at once, as if her heart was drawn to him while her mind pulled her back. One day, she decided to show him her home and introduce him to her child. Her heart tightened with nervousness. How would Max react to her little world? How would he feel about her son, whom she loved so dearly? Max came on Sunday morning. The small kitchen smelled of fresh pastries that Anita had baked earlier. Her son, at first shyly hiding behind his mother, soon, seeing Max, cautiously reached out his hand. Max smiled and bent down to be at the child's level. "Hi there, buddy. My name's Max. Want to show me your toys?" Her son nodded, and within a minute was showing him his favorite cars and books. Anita watched with a mix of joy and relief. Max had not only accepted her, but had immediately found a connection with her son. In the evening, they all sat together on the couch, reading a book aloud and laughing at the funny moments. Anita looked at Max and realized that her fears were slowly fading. He was ready not just to love her, but to be there for what mattered most to her. Noticing her gaze, Max quietly said, "I know this is a big responsibility, but I want to be a part of your life. We can face everything together." For the first time in many months, Anita felt that she was not alone. Max's love and his sincere acceptance of her child made her stronger, giving her hope for happiness she had long thought impossible. In that moment, she understood. Openness and trust can work wonders, and love that is true can overcome any fear.